Hey everyone, and a very warm, wise welcome to the second edition of the Wisdom Track podcast from the British Association of Anger Management. Remember, you can join the conversation at any time on our Facebook page. That's /BAM, BAAM UK. And add your comments, ask questions, and myself and the panel will do our best to answer them live. Today, we're going to talk about practical wisdom. Now, what is practical wisdom? We're going to explain more in a minute, but first, let's meet the panel. First, I'd like to introduce you to Karina Anderson. Karina practices depth coaching, where she develops the many nuances of self-leadership to unlock potential and create magic. Right, Karina?
Thank you.
Karina applies her approach not only to private clients, but also to businesses and also in prisons. And she's worked, in fact, with some high-profile organized criminals, which we can ask her about later. And you can find more about her at karinaanderson.com. Hey, Karina, thanks ever so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Steve.
So next up, we've got Jochem Janssen. Jochem is the founder of Amsterdam's TenClub, a society of the curious, where every member is fascinated by what it means to be human. TenClub's philosophy wonders what happens when intriguing people gather in beautiful spaces with a curious attitude and open minds. It sounds just like the Wisdom Track podcast. But if you want to find out more, you can go to tenclub.nl. Hey there, Jochem, how you doing?
Hi there, I'm very good.
I love this motto of the TenClub, Homo sum humani nihil arme alenium poto. Is it Greek or Roman?
It's Latin, yeah. And it means Roman. Basically, you know.
Sorry, mate, you go first.
So it basically means, it means being human in all its ways and accepting all of it. So it's always hard as a human to accept the things you don't like of yourself. But that art of accepting that, if you can do that, then a lot opens up. And I think beautiful things arise from those sides of you being human.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always struggled with it myself. And also on the panel today, Tara Love Perry. Tara is the UK's leading expert in the growing field of self-love. Tara's 7-step program, I Love You Me process asks, what if you loved yourself exactly the way you would like to be loved? Book, I Love You Me, 7 Steps to Transformational Self Love is available now. Hey, Tara, how you doing? You okay?
Hello, Steve. I'm absolutely brilliant. It's excellent to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm sure the viewers have noticed that you have a very strong Zoom background game going on there, yeah? Is that self-love? When I finally learn to love myself, will I have a better podcast background? Yeah, is that part of the deal?
You will sprout wings. No, the whole logo is actually a heart with the seed of life inside, which happens to have these 7 circles, or the flower of life, 7 circles for the 7 steps, which fulfills your heart, fulfills you, and then you get liberation. So that's what the I Love You Me method does for people.
Sounds divine, and people can find out more at taraloveperry.com.
Thank you.
So joining us today, as every month, Craig Snake Bloomstrand.
Glad to be here.
Hey, Snake, how's it going? Joining us from Minneapolis, Snake is the leader emeritus of the US Mankind Project. His work helps people develop an emotional world to match their intellectual one. Snake works with active duty military, maximum security prisons, and clients for his practice, sensible coaching and mentoring.com. Snake, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to join you all.
Last but not least, Mike Fisher. The anger guru, Mike Fisher, is arguably the world's #1 anger management expert. I said that, by the way, not him. His best-selling book, Beating Anger, is certainly considered the definitive text in the field. Mike founded the British Association of Anger Management in 1999. 3 decades of saving lives, jobs, and marriages later, he's back with his new project, The Wisdom Track, which this podcast forms the vanguard of. Hey, Mike, how's it going?
I'm really happy and I'm very relaxed and I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this presentation.
Well, thanks for bringing it together, Mike.
Pleasure.
So we're going to talk about practical wisdom. Sounds a bit of a buzz phrase, but I promise you we have it all worked out. Wisdom is an ancient concept, but its meaning has become a bit clouded. And the team at the Wisdom Track consider the definition to be absorbing the collective knowledge of humankind, implementing the aspects that produce beneficial change. But Snake, maybe you could tell us a bit more because you came up with all this.
Yeah. For years, when I was sitting in groups or working with people, I noticed what phenomenal wisdom people had and weren't really aware of it. And make the comment of, how much you appreciated what they'd managed to squeeze out of life. And most often people would go, who, me? I'm not wise. And so I got curious about that, made a cardboard sign, went down to a city park and tried to buy wisdom. The sign said, wisdom bought and sold 25 cents. I couldn't get anybody to buy or to sell. And I started thinking about how out of touch we've gotten with wisdom. And so, thanks to the internet, searched a lot of the different stuff that's been written about wisdom. And what I noticed is that wisdom differs from knowledge in one very important way. And that's that when we're talking about wisdom, we're talking about some knowledge that has a moral ethic to it, for the good of all. Knowledge can be used as a tool, but wisdom always has a component of for the good of all in some way or another. And so I really started focusing on that and asking people, well, what have you collected along the way that's helped guide your life that I could benefit from? And that opened people up to being able to speak about wisdom. So my big flag that I wave is that this doesn't belong to academics or philosophers. It belongs to all of us. And the shyness around claiming it is important to get through. I was born and raised in the Midwest of the United States. You would never brag about what you know. And that inhibits wisdom coming to the table too. So that kind of gives you into the neighborhood.
And how did, sorry, mate, how does the good of all fit with the good of the self? Because I'm sure you've probably had, clients in your practice say, but Snake, you tell me I need to look after myself. Now you're talking about the good of all. How do the two come together?
Through conversation. And that's why I'm particularly excited about the topic today, linking curiosity and wisdom. Because curiosity is, I think, a gateway drug towards all kinds of self-development as well as self-revelation. Because in order to really be curious, forgiveness comes into play, reserving judgment comes into play. So many other important emotions and social skills come out of creativity. And so I think the two fit together in a beautiful way.
Right, Karina, you work in all kinds of different environments. How do you find it when you take kind of thing we're talking about into areas like businesses and prisons where they might not be quite so receptive of self-love and self-knowledge? And
I think so. Thank you for the question, and I want to start with what Snake is bringing out, that really beginning to feel into the good of all. And that's difficult, of course, if I've disconnected from all. And I always use the comparison that each one of us is a cell in the body of we. Imagine you now have all the cells being hostile and they're not operating for the well-being of the body. So it's really important to, of course, be able to meet the self, meet the person in the story they're stuck in, and tell themselves about themselves. And I'm finding that, that when you have such an environment, like a prison environment, and it's been an incredible school for me to really meet the other in that space and in the story, and to create an invitation. And that's really the first invitation I certainly bring into, our conversation today, that invitation to just be curious about a little bit more. So instead of, that I always go to the same place in the buffet of life, I always eat the same meal, always have the same conversations. And even if in the beginning, like in a prison environment, that many inmates would come to the session space, and first they'll kind of be, whoa, this is different and this is new and I'm not having this conversation. But because it's different, it's still attractive, And so they might come the first time, they come the second time, and sometimes they come because, it looks good on their profile, and that's the same in the corporate, let's develop, and it looks good, then I might get easy parole, earlier parole. However, then it starts to get to their hearts. And I had especially one story of a general that I was working with for 3 years. And in the beginning, he even pretended that he didn't understand English, so he kept disengaging. And that was the story he lived in, the story of being a gang member and living in this space of fear in him, in himself. But it's interesting to see how the desert, and we could see it almost as a desert, and that mindset he was living in, how he started to become more interested, how he started to open up his heart, and how he, in the middle of this desert, started to create an oasis, because it sparked some curiosity. And that's been important, Steve, that when we are starting to invite this topic of wisdom, that he realized that the wisdom is also within me, within himself. And he started to feel it and experience it, because he just kept the door a little bit open, even if it was difficult and it was strange in the beginning.
And have you found the same with your private clients? I mean, how about the kind of average person in the street caught up in the rat race, lots of responsibilities, feeling a bit overwhelmed, ends up in your practice, that doesn't want to kind of hear about fluffy stuff or anything remotely like wisdom in the first place? How do you manage to kind of guide them in?
It's a really important question, because I find often, we only want to listen when something happens. When we get one of the big shakeups, so like this pandemic we're all experiencing, on a global scale. We are so busy in our story that we don't stop and we don't listen until something starts to happen in our life, and we are forced to stop and sit with that inner conversation. And once we have that, we begin to reach out and open that door. So somebody in a prison, Steve, has had that big wake up call, right? They're sitting in the middle of that. So we all live in a prison. It's not just the guy inside the prison, the general inside the prison. We all live in a prison. Once we realize that, and we need often a big shake-up in order to get to that space within ourselves. And so I do have people, in the public, that when they come to me, something has happened. Something has started occurring in their life, and they're starting to feel that something is missing, and they're starting to reach out and start to be willing to have a different conversation.
And you mentioned the pandemic then, and this is certainly a time when lots of people are reevaluating what they do every day. Jochem, talk to us a bit about where you think the pandemic is coming from, and how and why people are reevaluating their lives right now. I think you might have frozen. While Jochem sorts out his super fast Amsterdam broadband, Tara, why don't you tell us a little bit about your self-love project and how that fits into sort of self-knowledge, and the wisdom of yourself?
Yeah. So, can you hear me? Because
we can hear you now.
We can hear you now, mate.
So you're referring.
Wonders of modern technology.
Don't we love live broadcasts?
Live is where it's at. Live is where it's at. Hey mate, how you getting on?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was. Yeah. So because I'm missing a bit of the story because of the live conversation, but the point is that we're talking about wisdom and the self, if I'm correct. And we're talking about a pandemic that is occurring at the moment. I think, in my view, wisdom is sort of an escape room where you search for yourself. So we're basically, being wise is not a state of being, but it's an art of living or a way of engaging. And so to discover the self, yourself, is basically like being an artist in your own life. You try, you play, you discover, you uncover, you relate, you make love, you get hurt. And so what you see is the real self is an ongoing piece of character that changes all the time. But at the same time, there is this created self, the invented self. So we go to school, we become a character, we learn something, we have to act in a relationship according to certain ways. Society puts rules upon us. And so this invented self, this marketed self, this fearful self is what we're dealing with right now in the pandemic. And it's not working. So we're all afraid to lose something over something invisible. And we have all these regulations and rules trying to manage to uphold this constructed self. And instead of being wise and walking around and being sensible, understanding and feeling, we're all in massive fear. So the funny thing is, this is a very good crisis, I think, because we're falling apart. We're basically falling apart, all of us, because we're all dealing with a tremendous amount of crisis. And so we have to reinvent ourselves again. So the big lesson here is that, so let's start playing again. Let's start getting ill or not, or let's engaging with people that might be, dealing with a virus. And so it becomes a new character that we're trying to invent. And that's what I think is the exciting thing of the pandemic. Because, I get angry over the pandemic and I get, fearful and excited. But at the same time, it invites me to say, hey, let's go inside. Let's reinvent the economy. Let's reinvent the way we relate to each other. Let's reinvent communities. Let's reinvent the body. That's time for ourselves, etc., etc. So in my view, the crisis of the self, and it's inviting us to go back to real self. So I think that's a simple. There's lots to say about it, but is that
so the
is that a satisfying perspective?
Very.
So this is a fantastic opportunity for reinvention, and wisdom is the art of living. Savoir vivre, as the French call it. Mike, so we wrote a big article on the anger management website about.
Just give me a moment. I think
we'll go to tomorrow then.
Yeah,
so
go to tomorrow and then come to
tell
me.
us about self-love, how that fits into wisdom.
Oh my goodness. First of all, I feel really privileged to be sitting with you, group of incredible people, and you're really speaking my language. So I feel like we're really unified here, different voices of the same wisdom actually that's coming through here. And you're totally right. I think, Snake, what you said, like wisdom is for everybody. It's based on truth. If there's no truth in it, then it's not wisdom. So it has to be true, and it has to be for everybody. And wisdom seems to be a bit of a rare commodity in the world at the moment. I'm looking around and I'm seeing a lot of people very, very disconnected from themselves, very disconnected from the source of wisdom within them. And I mean the ultimate wisdom within them, and even, the other levels of wisdom where we could come back up to maybe even common sense, or our senses, being plugged into our senses as the pathways into the wisdom. And I see a lot of people, almost everybody, completely unplugged from themselves. And this has been an ongoing process for a very long time of people, like you were saying, Jochem, being conditioned into this artificial version of themselves, actually, ironically, wearing the masks, covering up their authentic self, covering up their true self, and wearing masks to appease everybody, to get the approval, to fit in, or hide who they feel they really are underneath, hide that shame, hide that lack of love, ultimately, that they're feeling, lack of recognition, or whatever that they're carrying inside. So it's kind of really ironic, this whole situation that we're in right now. And I would really invite people to, metaphorically speaking, take off the masks. Actually, it's an end of pretending. The world has not worked very well. It's not been based on wisdom. Our institutions, our structures, our societies, our lifestyles don't seem to have been based on very much wisdom at all. Been based on theologies and ideas and ideals, or, I don't know, some disconnected from source version, some conditioned version of ourselves. Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's like, now is an opportunity to really recognize the mass dysfunctionality of our societies and go, who is it really serving? I don't think it was serving the children. I don't think it was serving the elderly. I don't think it serves people in their relationships. I don't think it serves people at their core values. I don't see us living in a society that's serving the heart. It's become very much mind orientated, taking us away from our wisdom and away from our senses and away from our authentic self. And it's like, look at the result. People are stressed and sick and dying and having massive breakdowns. Mental illness has gone through the roof. It's literally insane. It's literally insane. And that's just a measurement of how far away we are from our own wisdom, how far away we are from our own source. And if this pandemic is the pause button to say, whoa, thank goodness, this is a blessing. It allows me the space to reassess my own life, your own life, each one of us, to reassess our own life and go, where am I in my peace? Where am I in my happiness? Where am I in my well-being and my health and my wealth and my relationships? And having to actually face all that we've avoided up until now. That we've shoved under the rug and we've stuffed behind that mask and go, actually, masks off, people. Let's have a look at what we've run away from. And actually, like Jochem was saying, come back to our true selves. And in my understanding, I've been working with people like you guys for a really long time. And from what I see as being the fundamental cause of all dysfunctionality, all illness, all disharmony in a human being, is a apparent lack of feeling loved. That comes right back down to the fundamental cause. I don't feel loved, therefore I'm going to act out, therefore I'm going to behave in a certain way and seek for it outside of myself and behave in certain ways to try and get that love from the world, from people, from wherever I can get it, because I'm living in a state of lack. And what does love mean? It's very, very simple. It's very practical. It means I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm held, I'm empathized with, I'm validated, I'm safe, I'm protected. And when we don't have that feeling of love, I'm cherished, I'm valued, I know who I am, I know why I'm here. Right? Love is that wisdom as far as I'm concerned. Love is the ultimate wisdom. And I'm talking about the essence of love, the unconditional love that we actually breathe in every single moment, that, is our existence itself. And from that place, just, kind of come back to our senses, come back to our breath, come back to the reality that's happening within. And instead of looking for other people to validate us and make us safe and tell us their wisdom and tell us what to do, how about we get very curious, get connected to that little child inside of us, that little beautiful little child that is full of genius, full of wisdom, full of knowledge, and come back to that inner child, and with that curiosity be like, what is it that I need? Where do I not feel loved? Where are my gaps? Where are my holes? Where's my lack? And this I love you me process that got sculpted over a period of time, working with people, is a method that each and every single one of us can adopt as our own and take it on. It's not Tara's method. It's not, it's just something, it's a conversation that we can have with ourselves to bring ourselves back from the insanity, back from the disconnection, using that curiosity, connecting with the child within, and having this 7-step conversation that's about being seen, being held, being validated, being accepted, being forgiven, and liberated from the conditioning, liberated from the traumas and the illness, and literally just brings us back to our true self, back to our hearts, back to our divinity, and sets us free. And it's just completely miraculous. And so, that's wisdom to me, is going, how do I feel? Connecting to the senses, connecting to the breath, connecting to the source of love that we are. For me, that's ultimate wisdom.
Tara, that was wonderful. So, to me, we're talking about authenticity. We're talking about instinct. We're talking about humanity as opposed to society, or what we currently have as society. Mike, where do you stand on practical wisdom, and why do you think everyone can use it, not just people who are spiritually or therapeutically minded?
So I want to go back a few steps. I want to go back to when Snake and I first started having that conversation. So usually what happens for the audience is we come up with some ideas. Snake and I get together. We have this 2.5-hour discourse, which we video. I then give it to somebody to transcribe. We then pass it back to Steve. Steve cleans it up, then brings it back to Snake and myself. So that's kind of the origins or the genesis of this particular podcast. But for weeks now, Steve, as I think I already mentioned to you, I might have mentioned to you, is that I've been pondering this phenomena called practical wisdom. And, for the life of me, I find it really difficult to articulate exactly where I sit with it. And as you know, I'm a therapist, so I'm pretty much front line. But listening, to the rest of the panel, everything that everybody said is absolutely resonated with me. But my thinking is about, if I think about my client group, who happens to be really, really angry people, that's why I described it as the front line. I think about how do they access their own innate wisdom, and just listening to some of the things that are being said. So one of the things that Snake said, which I thought was very fundamental, which is, we all have wisdom. It's not just for philosophers and academics and intellectuals, not at all. It's for every person in the street. But what's starting to emerge from this conversation is how we lack trust in our own innate wisdom. What's getting in the way of that? So that's one of my thoughts. Jochem, I just love where your head's at. And I totally get when you talk about the pandemic, and, I know you and you know me, and I've been involved engaged in your philosophy of curiosity for a long time now. And I just love the fact that something like the pandemic has emerged so that people will re-question who they are, what they want, where they're going, what's the big plan? And so there's something about, you use that term, the big wake up. And for me, there is something to be said about every time somebody goes into crisis, it calls for a big wake up, whether it's a pandemic like we've had or have, or whether it's a personal crisis. Then I go deeper into the question of the creator self and this idea of reinventing ourselves, not, every time we go into crisis, but every time we need to understand something much more significant about who we are in the world. Crisis is one way of looking at it, but there's so many other ways of looking at it, like conversations like this, reading the books, attending the workshops, etc. And then I come to this idea of self-love. And, Tara, I support what you're saying, because I do think that the fundamental gesture is to love myself. And I know that it's a cliche, before I can love others, I need to love myself. However, I think it's a fundamental truth, this idea of truly falling in love with myself. I was quite interested in what you're saying with regards to those 7 steps and how that might work and how that might apply to my own client group, because so many individuals I work with, they hate themselves. They're disgusted in their behavior. They're ashamed of who they are in the world. And of course, from my perspective, it's heartbreaking to see and hear, simply because these are extraordinary people with an amazing amount of wisdom, collective wisdom. And then, of course, I'm thinking about this idea, and I think it might have been you again, Tara, but I'm thinking about this idea of the less authentic we are, the more difficult it is to access practical innate wisdom. So that's kind of what's started to come out of the conversation for me. But if I just go deeper into my own process, thinking about, what is it exactly that triggers innate wisdom, practical wisdom? And, I keep coming back to the cliches, which are based on consciousness and awareness, making mistakes, reflecting on my mistakes, and learning from my mistakes. But there is something to be said about being caught up in, therapeutically, the term is repetitive compulsive disorder. And we keep recreating trauma. How do we jump the curve? And so what I'm hoping, as part of the conversation this afternoon, or when anybody actually watches this presentation, we'll start to understand more about how to jump the curve. And I think there's a lot of wisdom here right now in order to support that. And that, of course, is where my curiosity lies, Jochem. How do we jump the curve?
So you want me to respond to that, Mike?
Anyone can respond to that.
Well, I have something, a perspective I think is interesting. This book on emotions, how they're made recently. And what's intriguing is that we live in cannot know. We have no reality, we're surrounded. What we can do is feel, touch, think. So we have all these to relate to that we're surrounded by. But the better we're skilled in that, the more synchronized we are with that reality. And now here lies some wisdom comes in. So the wisdom to me is the art, the skilledness by which we can relate to these human toolings. So to love yourself, to learn yourself, to play with another, and to not be afraid of all these doings is childlike playfulness by which we enter the reality which we don't know. And that's what I found so interesting in that book, that it stated that all our emotions are just simulations of reality. All our thoughts are simulations of reality. And as long as we take them too seriously and we think they're the truth, then we try to defend ourselves too harshly and we get out of contact with the reality. So I found that a very interesting perspective, that we have to basically practice getting in tune with reality which we don't know and will never know. And I think that is where wisdom comes in play.
Just like to speak to that too.
Just give me a moment, Snake, just before you do. I didn't hear the title of the book. I think it'd be quite useful just to hear that again.
Okay.
So the title of the book?
It's written by a dog.
It's Lisa Feldman, How Emotions Are Made. How
excellent.
Emotions
Thank
Are
you.
Made by Lisa
Thank you.
Feldman.
I'll find it.
Go ahead, Snake.
So let me pull a thread through this because
Written by a dog.
we're talking about practical wisdom, and that means accessible to everyone. And where I totally agree with the self-love thing, to demystify that, I'd link it to self-knowledge. Now, I've spoken to many people over the last several months who are really struggling. They're angry, they're anxious, and oftentimes what happens when we get down to the bottom of it is they're in grief.
Sit down, baby.
Now, one of the things I've noticed in myself, and this is where the self-knowledge comes in, is if I'm angry or anxious, I know to look to grief. And that's just one of the many emotions we have to choose from. Particularly in time of pandemic like that, we're asked to exercise our compassion, our boundaries. So many different aspects of us that have emotional triggers that we use every single day. And so the self-love and self-knowledge, being aware of my own reactions and how I respond to outside stimulus, is incredibly important to wisdom. And I draw on other people for that. Other people model that for me, whether it's clients or working with large groups. I'm curious about how other people frame up topics like grief, and I learn from them. So that's what I mean by for the good of all, that we instruct one another in more self-knowledge by virtue of watching one another and being open to other perspectives in that way. And I think that increases the self-love exponentially. If I come at it knowing that anger and anxiety are my choices, and that's my habitual response, then that's all I'm going to have. Once I discover that grief is underneath that and allows for a decompression, I'm ahead of the game.
You know, what just comes up for me, you know, when you speak, both Snake and Mike and Jochem, you know, so when we speak about self-knowledge, also that ability that we meet ourselves, really meet ourselves and meet all the different characters we've developed, you know, the stories we tell ourselves. And one of the practices that I do very early in the process is that self-identification, to really be able to see if it's the angry one, you know, the one, the unloved one, the hostile one, whoever it is that I have created in my story. And to be able, it's incredibly powerful when we can take ownership, really own that experience and the story we're telling ourselves, and beginning to separate ourselves. Because when we step into practical wisdom, so one aspect is a better decision making, of course, to knowing who I am and who am I not. And then to tap into the innate wisdom and separate myself from that, whatever shows up in me. And I begin to walk the journey with the self. You know, so I have the wise one, but I also have the hurt one in me. And it's incredibly important to be able to hold both. There's a wisdom in that too, to say, well, I have this very human experience. So it's not a bad thing to experience all these things and all these emotions. But what do I do with it, and how do I leverage of it to become a much better person for the purpose of us all, for the good of us all?
Absolutely.
Duality is unavoidable on this plane of existence, as Peter Carroll said.
So jump in and if it's unavoidable, jump in and master it.
Karina, there's something that I just want to develop on. You know, you talk about the different parts. I think it came up in the last presentation, Snake, when we spoke about the witness or the observer. That place of stillness where we can actually observe ourselves. And I think there's something very fundamental, you know, if I reflect on that within the context of my own wisdom, my own practical innate wisdom, is that when I'm in that place of the observer, observing that part of me that might be grief-bound, that might be hurt, that might be ashamed, that might be angry, but to observe it from a place where I have sufficient self-love, or what I would define as compassion within the context of what I'm describing, to be able to do that. But in order to do that, there's something about how I have to slow down my internal system, the internal self, in order to become the observer of the self, which I would probably want to call the true self, but that it feels a little too esoteric for me. But I think there is something to be said about that, the capacity in order to grow in wisdom. It involves the observer and the witness, or combination of the two.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I think it's so important that we really learn to pause. And that if I can create a split second, and it makes me think of the general again immediately, inside prison, because I mean it's very harsh environments, and it's not just inside prison. We have it everywhere. But can I stop myself before I begin to diminish my environment? Can I press the pause and be able to take that observer seat, and really notice that about myself before I shoot everybody around me? Metaphorically, right?
And maybe not metaphorically either.
Oh.
There is a term, it's called the pregnant pause. And I do write about that in my second book, Mindfulness and the Art of Managing Anger. I just love the term, the pregnant pause, because it means that in that moment of stillness or silence, something is being birthed that maybe I've not discovered before.
Another aspect of that, too, I think is important, particularly as a facilitator. It was a real relief to realize I didn't need to come with an agenda. But as the observer, there was plenty of material to work with in people. They would bring it. It wasn't all on me.
True.
There's a certain hubris in being the expert, and a tremendous amount of pressure that comes along when all the gold is sitting right there in front of us if we choose to take a look and pick it up.
Maybe the expertise and the wisdom you're describing there, Snake, is the ability to just be super present and listen.
Yeah.
Listen for what wants to come through. And there's a great deal of wisdom in that. And how incredible if we could give ourselves that space, that presence. And
it's difficult to get there too, because for myself, growing up as a man, I had to have the answers.
Yeah.
That was part of my role, was to know everything, which I didn't, and have all the answers, which I didn't. And the pressure of living under that was crushing. The idea of sitting back and other people come to the table was extraordinarily liberating for me as a facilitator.
So does wisdom come with age, or is it something that we can discover from children, or indeed our own inner child?
I'd like to respond to that.
A dimension.
You go ahead, Jochem. Go ahead. I'll come back to my response. Jochem, you there? So let me respond. We'll pick up on him shortly. There's something to be said about the ability to embrace change, but there's such a resistance to embracing change simply because it means that I have to step into the unknown. And there's a huge amount of discomfort stepping into the unknown.
That's my personal. Are you there?
I'm here, but you keep breaking up, Jochem. So there's something about how.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
How do I?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the question by Steve was about does wisdom come with age? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And yeah. But I had a remark before that, which I wanted to add to the conversation of wisdom, and then I'll talk about age. One of the things I find very interesting in wisdom is fantasy. Because we often talk about stillness and observation as a wise human being. But I believe also that being fantastic as a human being and fantasizing a universe or a way of doing or generating new selves or being a creator is the additional aspect of being a wise human. So it's the aspect of observing and the aspect of fantasizing our own lives. And these two combined, which the second is probably more a characteristic of the young person, and the first is more a characteristic of the older person. So does wisdom come with age? Yeah, the observational aspect comes in age, but the fantastic aspect comes at young age.
Yes.
So I would say that probably somewhere when you cross the two, being a fantastic, fantasizing and observing human being, if you can cross those and bring those together, probably you get that excitement of being the creator of your own universe and the observer of your own universe. And most likely, I would say that's also the center point of wisdom. But that's something I wanted to add.
So if I love what you've just said, so just let me develop on that. So basically what I was saying was that there's something about, the resistance to change, but young children, very young children, are so unbelievably spontaneous until they hurt themselves, or they are shamed, or they are limited in some way by the caring parent or primary carer. So there is something to be said about that spontaneity, which is an opportunity to explore practical wisdom. And in the conversation I was having with this friend of mine, I was saying, well, hold on a second, let's be very clear. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to be old or aged in order to be wise. There are kids that are aged 2, 3, 4 that are much wiser than so many people that I already know, because of their spontaneity, because of their imagination, because of their creativity. And as long as it's nurtured and celebrated and blessed and acknowledged, it's profoundly transformative. The problem is that most kids here know, shut up, behave yourself, be still, rather than giving them the opportunity to liberate themselves through their own spontaneity. So thanks for developing on that and bringing that up, Jochem.
If I just can add, Mike and Jochem, when I'm thinking about this spontaneous human being, but I'm sitting with a lot of client processes where people, exactly because they were told like that growing up, or even in the early years, not really exploring with curiosity. And the moment they are given that space, and that's our task, right? When we're holding that space, not to interfere too much, but they feel celebrated and cared for in that space, and to create that. So we begin to ignite it. So I can begin to go out and explore. And I've had in corporate arenas, people like never really touching that space in them and just doing the same old. And suddenly they go out and create magic.
Yes.
Suddenly they give themselves permission again to be fantastic. And even if they have for many years not allowed that, I don't think that's an age thing either. But it's really, I got to give myself permission. And the moment I do that, I can begin to allow that wisdom to flow and have an expression as well.
Tara, how do we give ourselves permission to be fantastic?
I am so excited about what you're all saying, because this, for me, when we validate the child, right? When that little innocent child who is fully connected to all of their senses, they're fully embodying their spirit. They're receiving the breath as unconditionally as it's being given. They're receiving life as unconditionally as it's being given. And at that point, there are no filters. There's no head trip. There's no separation into the ego and the identity of who they think they are. They're just being fully them, And the very first thing, for me, wisdom comes right back to the breath, because without it, you are literally nothing. The very first thing we do as a human being on this planet is receive a breath. And most people are so engaged in something out here, they're forgetting to receive back into here. So the moment you can press pause, you called it a pregnant pause, Mike. It's just a breath. Oh, hello, I'm breathing. Hello, me. Hello, breathing me. hello, breath. You know, it's like recognition, switch the senses on, recognize what's being given. And through these senses, just like that little child, when we validate, when we listen, when we see, when we acknowledge, when we empathize, right? I don't really like this term of just witnessing. It sounds very cold and distant and aloof in my mind. That's how I hear it. Because as a little child, if we just witness our children, I think they're going to feel very disconnected. The child feels really loved, I feel, when they're fully connected with, through all of the senses. We see them, we listen to them, we engage our presence, we engage our heart connection with them so that they feel our heart open to their heart. That's an actual sense. We can feel when a heart is closed and when it's open. We have that gut instinct, that gut intelligence operating. We have the empathy operating to empathize, and therefore we can have compassion, like you said, Mike. You know, we have that stillness and yet the excitement and the welcoming of who that little child is. And when the child receives all of that and is validated for all of their extrasensory senses as well, that child grows up absolutely magnificent. They're fully connected. They're actually probably, you know, somewhat, well, very different from the average person. That's how to be a super being. That's how to connect into your real genius and to be fully human, in my opinion. But most all of us were devoid of that level of love through the senses, because how else do we experience the world other than through our senses? We taste it, we smell it, we touch it, we see it, you know, we empathically engage with it. So that's how we receive the love. So if we're a little kid that didn't grow up with that level of connection, that level of presence and love and validation, then we remain a little child inside of this big adult body our whole lives, with the adult self kind of up here in the brain, like Snake was saying, going, I have to know everything. I have to be the one that's right. I have to, you know, be seen to be getting it all right. And meanwhile, the inner child's inside suffering, feeling completely disconnected from. So for me, yeah.
Can I add something to your story? Because I love the idea of the unconditionality of being human. Yeah, the overwhelming love, being, you know, everything is allowed. You can feel, sense, you can be. In our club, TenClub, we've been struggling a lot with the word love because it's Walt Disney-fied.
Oh,
you know, when we talk about love, you have all these concepts. So then we started to investigate love as an unconditional energy. And so we came to the word curiosity as the exact synonym for love, because when you're curious, you engage unconditionally. You always will try again. You want to find out what's the truth, but you'll never know the truth. You will want to uncover. You will want to engage, etc., etc. So, and for some people, the word love is more accessible. For other people, curiosity is more accessible. So I'd love to post that, you know, add to that, to your story, as possibly another entrance into, into a wiser way of living. That when you act upon love, being curious, it's a similar type of thing that happens.
I think so.
Perhaps the word love, receiving kind or so, and the word curiosity is more the acting kind. Yeah.
Well, I would say, what would happen to us if we grew up and nobody ever said to us, I love you? Like, what if your mom never said to you, I love you, or your father never said to you, I love you? How would we grow up with that? And so maybe we have I think we do have a very distorted view of what love is. It's been, you know, defiled. It's no, people are so, the thing is, when you're in your head, disconnected from the inner child, disconnected from your senses and your heart, and you're trying to intellectualize love, you're never going to get there, because your mind does not know what love is. Just like your mind is not where the wisdom is. It's just knowledge. It's knowing. It's mechanical. There's no actual wisdom there. You know, wisdom is it practiced. It's embodied. There, it's connected to your other senses and the heart. So I would say,
what comes up for me, when we speak about, we also speak about words here, but for me, it's a very energetic exchange as well. If I think about my own upbringing and the energy that was exchanged. So even, that if somebody says, I love you, but energetically that person shows up with anger or with violence.
Absolutely.
And so for me, it's less about the words. And also as a mom myself, how I show up and in my presence and in my care. And it's me being there and then feeling in my own practical wisdom, the practice of taking my tools to gym every day and to be that best version is all about the energy I bring into each space I enter. If I sit with a client, and I also educate coaches, and it's a big part of the coach educational training to come from either separate energy or from energy that is more whole, more from my innate wisdom, where the calm that happens in people that enter those spaces, you can feel it immediately. It doesn't matter what you call it or what we label it, but people fall into that space, and it's incredible to experience. So I would use less words and more the experience of how the spaces we create, and how do I leave each space? How do I enter it, and how do I leave it? And that also becomes a measurement of where somebody is at. When I journey with coaches in their training, the ability to hold that space, and people fall into that space. And also when I meet that inner energy within me that is like this, because I have it, I stopped breathing early in my childhood. I stopped breathing. And when I start to fill myself up with a new energy and a loving energy, a kinder energy, and everything is energy. So just adding that to the conversation.
So presence with that energy, with that breath, with the love that actually is, it's innate. It's not, it's almost not of this world, but here we are. Here we are in the process of embodying that, which we know on a divine level, and the inner child knows what it is to be loved, and it's not theoretical. You don't have to define love to a child. They're just being it. But we're still that child, and that's where the wisdom is. And to embody that inner child, to reclaim the inner child, and in a way reparent ourselves. I love you, little me. I see you, I feel you. Listen to the inner child. Empathize. Empathy is massively missing in our connections with one another. And just like Snake was talking about, just that ability to just be present and listen. Could we give that to our own inner child? That probably where the anger comes from long ago, when the inner child's boundaries were completely, ruined. There was no boundary being held for that child's safety, no boundaries of love being held for that inner child. And to go back to the inner child, and you were talking about jumping the curve there, Mike, as well. Like that, I'm kind of going back to that question about jumping the curve. It's a lot of the time, not every time, but a lot of the time, to go back to the inner child, where those first moments of my boundaries have been severely damaged and broken, I've not been cared for, and to take those steps to reconnect and be fully present with the inner child within someone. Listen to their anger. Hello, little angry me. I hear you. I feel you. I'm going to empathize with you. I'm not going to leave you on your own and just watch you. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to parent you and hold you, and acknowledge where the boundary was damaged, where that anger comes from, and take responsibility for it and say, yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, owning that. I'm sorry your boundary was broken. I'm sorry you're angry. It wasn't fair. You're right. And validate the reason for the anger in the first place, because that's a wisdom right there. There's knowledge waiting to be discovered, I believe, in that wisdom, where it's like, you're not angry for no reason. There's a flipping good reason why you're angry. Something wasn't okay.
Well, another thing.
Yeah, can I just finish and just really acknowledge, really be with and acknowledge and validate those emotions, because our feelings are part of our compass for our well-being and living our truth and being safe. We need those feelings. That's part of our journey to wisdom. And then just to, and I believe in forgiveness, to forgive all those elements and to forgive the self and be like, please forgive me. I didn't know how to look after you, little me. I didn't know how to keep you safe. And we invite that child back to the heart, back to love, and we hold themselves and we hold proper boundaries. And for me, that's how to jump the curve, or not jump the curve, but fill in the gaps in that gap, in that unknown, in that black void of, I don't know how to get from this traumatic thing, this grief, this loss, this anger, back into one's, embodied state of wisdom.
I was just thinking about what Mike asked, a little bit earlier on, Mike, when you're also sitting, with your clients and that are, very angry and stuck in that place. And also what you're saying, Tara, and what comes up for me also when I journey with people is remember that our inner child has been journeying with a few puzzle pieces and on a very narrow highway on life. And I think, when we do visit that inner story and inner experience, we bring a lot of newness with us, So very often there's also a lot of misunderstanding that inner child sits with. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily for me, yes, it's meeting and holding and embracing that, but also maturing that space in me. And for me, the journey is very much about a maturation, that when I really begin to understand where I blocked myself, stopped myself, and begin and invite that space of me that only sits with two puzzle pieces into a much broader highway, Mm. So that in itself is also such an beautiful practice.
Mm.
So I want to go back a few steps. As I listen to this conversation, I think there's something that's not being addressed here, which is around imagination. Our own imaginations and our own creativity. And so I'm trying to get a sense of, the more limited I am, for whatever reason, it could be trauma, it could be whatever, the more limited I am, the less I trust myself. And the less I trust myself, there's something to be said about my fear of stepping outside of that comfort zone that I've created for myself. And I think it's something to be said about when I am afraid of stepping out of my comfort zone, that's when my capacity to embrace practical wisdom is limited. But there's something else that you said, Snake, and I, it's something that feels very dear to you when you talk about the connection to grief that you were talking about earlier on in conversations. He's disappeared in conversations that we've had. But I think that in the work that I do, one of the major problems that most of the clients that I work with have is their inability to deal with grief. And I think that also suggests that if one is heartbroken, truly heartbroken, they might have the necessary awareness, they might have the practical wisdom on some level or another, but there is still something about not being able to push beyond their own heartbreak. It's a pity Snake's not here because I'd like to hear his comment, but I'm also curious, from others in the group, what they might think about that.
So I'm happy to offer. I'm happy.
Yeah,
I'm happy to offer an angle. So I do work, a lot with people in grief who lose, either their child or their partner. I myself lost a partner in a car accident 18 years ago, and have raised my two kids. And what's been really important in the grief process and in my own understanding of dealing with that space has very much begun to both meet myself, the grieving one, but also meet the healer in me. And once I begin to tap into that innate wisdom and give space for the healing process, but understanding who I also am in the process, Mike. And there's something I work a lot on when I sit with people in grief is to give that space, but also to remember who I am in that conversation so that I'm able to, within myself, to facilitate the healing space as myself and as the healer. And that's really, really significant in a healing process, I find. I mean, that's how I approach the grieving conversation. So it's my job to help equip my client, both as a griever, but also as the healer. And these are two different approaches and two different angles.
I would like to, can I add something? Can I add something there, Karina? Mike?
Yeah.
What I find most interesting about sadness or grief is that if you consider life itself, it's pretty disappointing. Because I have so many expectations from so young on, and it never happened, and I never got it, and on and on and on. So it's a pretty sorrowful and painful and disappointing life we have. Yet at the same time, we always pretend it's great. So my Facebook looks great, my life looks great, my body looks great, everything looks great. And so this whole conversation about disappointment and sadness and sorrow and grief and pain, that conversation is rare. Rare with myself, rare with you, Karina, rare with you, Tara, rare with you, Mike, because it's not a conversation we'd like to have often. But it's also the river on which we float, the river of sadness. And it's that river on which our ship sails and on which we create. Once we allow that river to be there, it becomes our vessel. And so perhaps the invitation for all of us, all of humanity, to express more of our sadness, disappointments, pains, not being seen, not being held, not being, all the creations that failed upon me, all the Olympic championships I didn't make, and on and on and on. I think that conversation might be part of being really wise, is that we have to have that more often.
Absolutely.
Because I fucked up my life for part of it. Yeah, it's really disappointing who I am. It is, and I can't hide it. So we should cry probably for eons.
And be held while you cry too. I feel like grief is definitely not something that needs to happen on our own. We, tribal peoples and in our older cultures, we grieve together as a family, as a community. And these days that's so broken. And I've held personally the privilege of holding grief ceremonies in quite a number of countries. And actually, we just need to grieve together. And I believe going into those less, pretty environments, those deeper, darker, murkier waters of our being. I mean, we are 75% water, 73% water. There's emotion there. And to deny that is to deny the self. And so self-mastery and self-love is all about going into the darkest, dirtiest places where we don't feel loved, where we are broken and disappointed, and actually bringing a little candle, a little flame of consciousness and some love into those places and embrace all of who we are as a human being. To me, that's what love is, embracing everything unconditionally.
So
beautiful.
We should launch we should
speak to the community aspect.
Perhaps we should launch the Day of Grief.
Yes. Grieving for the world. I feel like the world needs grief right now to heal. There's so much been buried inside every person and literally, collectively, so much buried trauma. It needs to come out for the world to heal. And I've been inviting people to find their communities and their circles and hold space for one another and grieve together, and how absolutely crucial that is. And let each other speak and cry and snot and rage and just the whole thing. Let it out and hold space for one another so that we can heal.
I love it, Tara. It's so important. And also thank you, Jochem, for really bringing that into the conversation. And I remember about 6.5 years ago, I had an armed robbery, and it cracked open, a lot of things in me. It was a horrible experience. And, I've never allowed my grieving from, growing up, and I was holding so much trauma, and I was being brave and I'm being strong, and I was fine, but I wasn't fine. And it took me over a year to hold that process, to host that process. And I was going up and down to Joburg to clients, and on all those trips, I got panic attacks. And I always loved flying. So it's so crucial to attend that. And it changed everything about how I also did my coaching, to give more space for exactly that, the release, right? That it's okay to release. We can't renew anything. We cannot renegotiate those contracts in our lives unless we release the old. So I'm loving, what really is surfacing in the conversation.
Snake, I think you were going to say something. Snake, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yeah. I was just going to mention that part of grief is an internal process, but an even larger piece is a communal process. People through all time have processed what they don't understand in a group. And it really is the beginning of theater. Theater was created to help people process what they didn't understand, what they felt. And so that's what I was going to add in.
So, guys, here I am. I need to be a lot more wise, right? And I've heard some beautiful things in terms of the concept of wisdom, and I've heard some very optimistic things in terms of right now being an opportunity to seek out wisdom, or at least change ourselves, to find more wisdom in our life. How do I go about it on a sort of everyday basis? How do I get wiser day to day? What would you each suggest? Tara, you go first.
Thank you. Breathe. Step one of anything,
all the rage,
is breathe. And it's so ironic and so interesting that so many people are walking around like this, literally not breathing, and then separating and wondering why there's so much trauma and dysfunction and so much, unhappiness and mental health problems happening. It's like, breathe. Breath is life. If you don't breathe, you're disconnected from your body, from your emotions, from your mind, and eventually from life. Right? Stop. Disconnection isn't what we want. Disconnection hurts. Disconnection is death. It's, you'll go somewhere else. Breathing is everything. So step one, and notice that we first must receive a breath before we can give it back and give it out. And we're so conditioned and programmed to be giving out all the time to prove ourselves. It's time to reverse it. It's time to balance it out and start receiving this breath exactly as it is. And it means getting our head out of the way, all of our filters, all of the lumps in our throat, all of our, decongest basically. And start practicing just receiving a breath just as it's given without trying to mess it up in any way or control it. Like, let go of the control. You talked about that contraction, Karina. No oxygen will make you sick. Open and start receiving into every single cell of your body and awaken, because breath is also consciousness. Right? You'll go unconscious if you stop breathing. Right? How practical does it get? It's, I'm talking something that some people would consider very spiritual, but it's so practical. The spirit needs the body to be you. You need to merge spirit and body to have a you existing. You can't take away one of them or the other one, right? You have to unify them.
Steve, shall I add a perspective? What I would recommend. What I think it's a very interesting practice is ask an essential question to yourself every day. So you wake up and you ask an essential question. How can I be more happy today? Or how can I better relate to my children? Or why am I disappointed? Or any day you ask a question, you don't answer it, but you send out a question and some answer will come back to you. You become more aware of the things that you ponder on, that fascinate you. That's an advice I would like to give.
Nice. So just to step in as well. So I think a very important practice is to face the brutal facts. And I often call them the self-care brutal facts. I really got to look myself in the mirror and I got to recognize the things about myself that stand between me and my greatness. So honesty is at the front seat and take ownership of that experience, because only then will I start to change it.
Snake, can we hear from you? What would be your number one tip for attaining a bit of practical day-to-day wisdom? Oh, no, he's muted. There we go. Again, Snake.
I would say emotions aren't there just to be inconvenient. Pay attention to the emotions. They're there to tell you something. Somewhere between my brain and what I feel is the truth. So what I advise people always is pay attention to what your emotions are telling you. It's not junk.
Mike.
Sure. So, I mean, God, I can say so much about that. However, I'm going to keep it limited because of time. So for me, I think there's something to be said, never to limit our creativity. I think that is kind of fundamental for me. By limiting my creativity, I limit my imagination and I limit my own true potential. And if I do that, it's very difficult to access practical wisdom. That's me.
And so, sorry guys, I was actually trying to type a question onto the bottom of the screen while I was talking there. So, breathing exercises, ask essential questions, pay attention to your emotions. What else can you guys add in the mix for people looking to be a bit more wise?
Yeah, I would say stay curious and connect to your inner child and start listening to him or her. Give him or her space to speak. And ask those questions to the inner child. What would you like to create today? How do you want to play? What have you got to say?
Nice. And I would like to add, take more risks.
I would like
to take, only if we take risk will we leave, some of the old stories and write new chapters. So be bold. Be bold. Be courageous.
Jochem, sorry? And he's frozen. We got some terrible tech issues down the end.
Karina, I'd like to be disruptive. Be disruptive. Nice. Adding to Karina. Can you hear me? Being disruptive. Yeah, I would add. Yeah. So do things you would never do. Go places you would never go. Kiss people you're not allowed to kiss. Make love. Etc. Etc. It's great.
So I think what comes up for me,
Mike, what would you do?
Well, for me, I think it's about authenticity. What I'd describe as radical authenticity. I think the more authentic I am, that means the more risks I'm taking, the more my capacity to open up those wise pathways in my brain become accessible.
Yeah.
Snake?
Yep.
Anything else you want to add to wisdom?
Make it personal. Everybody comes at this in a slightly different way. And the thing I've run across over and over again is, like I mentioned at the beginning, if someone says something wise, acknowledge it, because oftentimes they're not aware. It's the water we swim in. And so often I've heard stories of, emotional trial or ordeals of some kind or another, and what people have made out of it. The story they've made out of it is extraordinary. And they don't understand how extraordinary it is. So, to make it practical is to have it be every day with everyone. Not reaching for some high ideal as much as being human together. In my mind, this is about fully exploring our humanity. And we need to do that together. That's what I'd add in.
Nice. One thing that just comes up for me as well, on that note, is remember you are a cell in the body of we. So when you start taking care of you, you start taking care of me and all of us. So start with yourself.
Absolutely. Can I tag on to that one as well, Karina? And just say, go and love all the most unlovable parts of you. Yes. Go and grab them and have the conversation, the unspoken, haven't yet dared to face conversation you need to have, and go and put love there, loads of it.
And last but not least, don't take it so seriously. Let's make fun out of it. I think
make light work of heavy shit, I always say.
I would say. Yeah.
So, Mike, Snake, you guys came up with this concept.
Yeah.
What do you want to say to round us off?
Well, talk about making it a joke. Part of my in and out on this particular call was it's probably wise to not have a full tumbler of water on your desk when it's full of electronics. I spilled an entire tumbler of water across the desk. So pardon the absence, but wisdom will teach me to keep my glass of water elsewhere.
Oh, you poor love. I empathize with you, Snake. I'm so sorry. Sorry.
So first of all, it's been an incredibly fascinating conversation. It's been so broad, and it's fascinating that Snake's waters broke. It's so fascinating because we're coming from, first of all, different countries, as we discussed when we arrived here, but such different points of view. And I think there's something about, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I was really struggling with this idea of practical wisdom because in some level it feels so abstract, but it feels what we've done, it feels like we've really grounded in something. Well, one is very valuable, but grounded in substance. Yeah. One for a better word. And, if the people who are listening to this, and of course the people who will listen to this at some point in the next couple of weeks, take anything out of this, well, what I hope is they take everything out of it and really listen carefully to what's being said. I've made so many notes, and I can't wait to write a blog on this particular subject, because it's just kind of taken me deeper into my own process, and I'm very moved by it, actually. So thank you.
Yeah, beautiful.
Guys, I think that's going to wrap it up. I want to thank you all enormously for being here this afternoon. I know it's not easy at this time. I'm going to let you all say goodbye to the viewers. Karina, thank you ever so much. Cheers.
Sure. Thank you.
Find out more about Karina at karinaanderson.com. Tara, thank you ever so much for being with us today from Brighton. And people can find out more about you at taraloveperry.com. Jochem, thanks loads and loads. Give my love to Amsterdam. I missed it. And people can find out more about your work at TenClub.nl. Snake, thanks ever so much. Hope you get the flood sorted. Yeah. And thanks ever so much indeed.
Beautiful. Great to meet you all.
And Mike, thanks for bringing us all together today. Everyone, you can listen to the third episode of the Wisdom Track podcast. We're going to be talking about the fictitious mind, our inner narrative, and the stories we tell ourselves. That's going to be at 4:00 on Saturday, September the 19th. You want to make sure you get a reminder, find out more information. Then you want to stay locked to Facebook /BAM UK. And you can also sign up to our newsletter at angermanage.co.uk. This has been the Wisdom Track podcast from the Wisdom Track, which is coming soon. Thank you ever so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Well done, guys.
That's it.
We are here. We are.
Mike Fisher has been in the personal and professional development field for over 3 decades. Some of you might know Mike already, attended his anger management programs, or even read some of his books on anger. I'm talking to you today to introduce his new web launch, the Wisdom Track. If you split the word wisdom, you get wise domain. In other words, to inhabit the domain of the wise. And that's the purpose of the Wisdom Track. It's a platform to engage with wise thinking in order to reaffirm who we are in the world and our place in it. It's easy to get lost in the barrage of information that is spewed out to us in every direction daily. But are we able to discern what is true, false, or even critical? We are subjected to the sleights of misinformation with hidden agendas, but do we ever stop to think whether this is enriching the mind or poisoning it? Are we shaping ourselves, or are we allowing all these messages to shape us? Despite all the connectivity of technology, has it in fact made us more vulnerable to being shaped by external forces? And how does this affect our awareness or consciousness, both individually and collectively? You see, there's a personal element to wisdom too. It's different for all of us. It's about finding yourself, knowing what your boundaries and values are, and having a clear dialogue with your inner voice that instinctively knows what's the best course of action for you. We have an inner landscape that is important for us to inhabit, otherwise we lose touch not only with ourselves, but with our place in the world, our purpose, and our environment. We are already witnessing the consequences of this disconnection in our world, the lack of care, respect, and connection towards each other, as well as our one and only planet. COVID-19 has given us a rare opportunity to stop consuming and bring our focus into what is essential. So, what is essential for you? Sometimes becoming wise is about asking different questions. The Wisdom Track platform is a place where we can do all of that, where we get to talk, share, listen, and evolve together.